it shows you.
Oh.
You don't need to look there.
Okay, so this is the current slide, that's the next slide.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. This light in my face. Position myself so I can see everyone. Hi, Sushma. So I see some familiar faces, Urmilaji.
Oh, by the way, I didn't expect Savitha.Nanjangud would need an introduction, but looks like she does.
Yeah.
This is sad, Savitha.
I know.
Yeah. Some of you probably, the newer ones, haven't met Savitha. She's another Savitha we have. And she's with the H, yeah, Savitha with the H.
Hi.
Very important. And then she has been YB here for a long time.
2009
onwards, and her father has been around in Yasvasa forever. So she's connected with this family forever. And she has been now pursuing masters in psychology. So a big psychology fan, I should say, passionate about psychology. And you can. Rest of the introduction is through the talk.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I ended up in the other, like the YB center actually. So my car and my brain are programmed to just like drive straight there. So anytime any YB event, I just go straight there. Then I had to remind myself that it's here. So, and then some technical difficulties. So we'll get started. So namaste, and I'm very happy to present this topic to you guys because, like Ashwini said, I am passionate about this, and I've decided to even plunge in and do a master's in counseling psychology, and I'm doing it at Santa Clara University. My background is engineering, so I did an engineering degree and I worked in the Silicon Valley for quite a few years, and then came to Yoga Bharati, did the yoga teacher training, and I was very much involved with Yoga Bharati for quite a while, and then started working on yoga therapy course, and I even worked with a lot of participants and clients, and like people who came to me and at home. And then I realized that there was something more that I wanted. I wanted some more knowledge about this because fundamentally, transformation even in yoga therapy, what we are looking for our participants is the transformation in the mind, right? So it's great. Doing the asanas and the pranayama and all that has tremendous physiological benefits, and I have benefited from that too. But end of the day, there is something that needs to happen here, and Patanjali actually I think it's in the Vibhuti Pada where he talks about it. The Sri Ramji is here, and I'm a little nervous actually. I'm going to pretend that he's not here to teach psychology to like Yogacharya here. But maybe he can actually be a resource.
We have introduced to the whole class, he's a faculty and a student.
I know.
Yeah.
But still, when I saw your email, I'm like, oh no, Sri Ramji is in my class. But yeah, so Parinama, right? Parinama is the transformation that we are looking for, and so that is what I was seeking, that complementary knowledge, and then I decided that I was going to go in and pursue this full time. Okay, so then Ashwini invited me to come in and just give an introduction to you guys, and you're probably wondering why. So let me just have a show of hands. Is this a diploma yoga therapy course, or are you guys doing advanced yoga teachers training? What exactly are you guys doing, or is it a combination? It's a combination. So some of you are AYTT and some of you are DYT.
Some of us are foundation and some of us are the certificate.
Today is the Yoga Therapy Foundations.
Yoga Therapy Foundations.
Today, yes.
Okay.
Saturdays, yes.
Okay, so basically the focus is on yoga therapy.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a DYT. Well, no, that's what she's called.
DYT.
Yoga Therapy Foundations.
Yeah.
But DYT is following the IOYT curriculum, or is it a subset of IOYT? IOYT curriculum. Okay. So that's kind of where I was going with this. So you're probably wondering why we need this. Anyway, so I put these slides together 2 years ago for the previous batch, which is basically the yoga therapy batch. That's why I was asking, is it AYTT or what is it? So for the yoga therapy batch, and so this is actually, there are about 8 modules to this, and I fit them into like 5 workshops. And this time I think, the last time the workshops were much longer, but this time I think it's only like an hour and a half time or hour's time. So I'm going to shorten this, shorten it and do smaller, I guess,
Time is
lectures.
There's still time.
There's still time for that, right? So, and then in each module, I'm going to focus on some aspects. But initially, this module is going to focus on Western psychology. So don't pay too much attention to the slides. The slides are very wordy. Okay, so I threw in a lot of words there. So try not to like read the slides. I'll definitely be sharing the slides with you. I need to polish them. So I was actually editing the slides, and I have an edited version, a polished version, but I can't connect to that. So this is the old version of the slides. So don't pay too much attention to it. But really, why do we need even an introduction to Western psychology? So that was the question, right? And that's why I wanted to ask what you guys were working on, because it is a requirement for IOIT. So for those who are doing IOIT, yeah, you need, this is part, I think there's like a 30-hour requirement. But even otherwise, when you study therapy, when you study yoga therapy, you are looking at all the ailments, right? Like you're looking at cardiac ailments, pulmonary ailments, orthopedic ailments, all these different aspects, and you're looking at it from a medical perspective. You're looking at the medical information, you're looking at what kind of medical treatments are available, what kind of medications people are taking, so that you can have that conversation with the participants, right? And in fact, even in your assessment forms, you're going to ask all this information, and you're going to see how does that interact with the therapy practices that you're prescribing them. It's kind of similar in the case of psychology, because if someone comes in with a psychological disorder, a psychiatric issue. In fact, I think you have one module on that, right? On psychological disorders, neurological disorders. So you will be looking into that. So that's another reason why IOIT people put that into the curriculum. And then basically, it's a study of mind and behavior. And it's, in that sense, it's kind of a sister science to yoga therapy or yoga in general. Because there's really no such thing as yoga psychology. Yoga is all pretty much about the mind. It's about psychology. And of course, it's everything that we study, any of our scriptures that we study has psychology in it. Bhagavad Gita is also psychology, except it's grounded in spirituality. So it's not disconnected from spirituality. It is informed by spirituality. And then, of course, since we live here in the US, this is basically the Western civilization that we are living in. We live that kind of lifestyle. And, you will come across participants who are maybe seeing a psychiatrist or seeing a psychotherapist. And you will need to understand, what they bring with them, like their terminology that they use, So does that make sense? Why we need this? Okay. Just a quick show of hands. Have any of you done any study of psychology, like in college, or any of you went through high school here? You have?
Child psychology.
Child psychology. Where? De Anza?
DNC.
Okay, so you also?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And in college I did partly 2 years psychology.
Which college?
In India.
Oh, in India. Okay. Wonderful. So you guys, so there is some
And
people.
I am a psychiatrist.
You're Lata. Okay, nice to meet you. Got it. Okay. So I can't bullshit my way through this. That's what it means. But no intention of bullshitting. But I just want to say that I've only done 1 year. I did a few courses in West Valley College. I did three basic community college level courses. And then I joined Santa Clara University, and I've done only 3 quarters there, which is basically 6 courses. I'm in my 4th quarter now. So I'm not certified yet. I'm still on the journey. So whatever I share, I mean, please keep it in mind that that's my level of knowledge. And
Savitha, but also on the record to just say that you have been teaching this subject for a while, and yoga and psychology are also they go together, and that's the justification for her to be the faculty here, and IIT requires that actually.
yeah.
So to be fair, I mean, she's being humble and she's
Yeah.
being, she's taking, you're conservative. But we have already justified with IIT that yes, you have been teaching this subject.
Okay.
Like
yeah.
you see that it's 2016 slides right there.
Yeah, thank you. So, so that's the knowledge that I'm sharing with you guys. Okay, so we kind of went through this. So let's go a little deeper into what are the aspects of the. So I'm kind of use modern and Western interchangeably. So it's modern psychology, Western psychology, and the reason for that is previously you would have the Western psychology and Western and Eastern were quite divided, but now things are getting all mixed up where even in Western psychology you'll see people bringing in mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and all the Eastern concepts and transpersonal psychology, and so you'll see that infiltrating. So that's why I'm going to call it modern psychology. It basically gives an alternate way of understanding mind and behavior. And the way I look at it is I'm just fascinated by any kind of approach to resolving, mental health issues or understanding mind and behavior or understanding the spiritual nature of human beings, anything. So I'm kind of drawn to any kind of study or school. For example, if it's Taoism, for instance, or if it's shamanism, or there's so many different traditions, wisdom traditions, Tibetan Buddhism, and so anything. And this is just one other, right? This is just another stream of study of mind and behavior. And in the West, the way I've looked at it in through all my readings is when people started moving away from religion, away from the church, they still needed, there was still a spiritual thirst. They still needed some way to resolve their mental conflicts and to improve their lives and improve their relationships. So this is the way I look at it, is that people use psychotherapy as a sadhana, the way we use yoga as sadhana. So it is embedded in the American or Western cultural context. So that's how I kind of look at modern psychology. So as a sadhana, I mean, we're all on that path. So it's kind of a sister path, and it helps to understand how do they deal with things like improving people's emotional intelligence, improving their relationships. What are their concepts? So one concept is like the concept of the unconscious mind, and they work with that a lot. There are some schools of psychology that work pretty heavily with the unconscious mind, with dreams, analyzing dreams, analyzing motivations and habitual thought patterns, cognitive biases, and so there's a lot of richness. There's a lot of richness and depth in their science as well. So I feel that learning that, understanding that, in addition to understanding how yoga therapy works, I think it nicely complements what we do with yoga therapy, and again gives us some terminology and concepts that we can use to have dialogues with people like Dr. Lata. If you go to a psychiatrist, you want to know how to present or discuss your client's case with them, or even understand if your client is seeing, if your participant is seeing Dr. Lata and comes to you, you can have that conversation, intelligent conversation with them about this. Now the way the word psychology is kind of split between, or a conjunction between psyche and logos, and originally psyche meant soul in Greek. But over time, this thing about psyche, the word psyche, the application changed and shifted to more to mean the mind and not so much the soul. So that's why you will see in modern psychology the focus is really just on the mind. And the people who practice the psychology can be clinical psychologists, counseling psychologists, they can be involved in industrial applications, organizations, marketing, in schools, and then also in research. So research is a very big part of psychology. That's the other thing that I was attracted to, is because it really does, they try to make it into a science. Of course, there's some downsides of that, because you can't really, there are some aspects of the mind which you can't really research. But then they try to make it as evidence-based as possible, which is also what we do here with yoga therapy. We try to keep it evidence-based. And there's many levels, so again, going back to like the research and the way they look at psychological problems, there's different levels. There's the biological level, which psychiatrists like Dr. Lata will be focused on. So if there's an issue with like the neurotransmitters, or with the way the brain's functioning, if there's a medication for a particular ailment, so that would be kind of at the biological level. And then there's the interpersonal level, and that includes the individual psychic level as well. And that is at the psychological level. And then there's also the sociological level, where you're kind of embedded in a particular society. So a person may have a psychological disorder, in quotes, in one context, but be perfectly normal and healthy in another context, right? So just to give you like an off-the-wall example, right? Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa had very unique way of practicing his spirituality. So he was obsessed with Kali Ma, right? So he would pray to her and sing to her, and then the way he did his pujas, he would do these weird things where he would be offering, he was responsible for doing the pujas in the Kali temple, right, in Dakshineshwar. And he would offer the flowers, and then he would start throwing the flowers on himself. So he would sort of immerse so much in that consciousness of Kali that he ended up invoking it in himself. Now, in some contexts, people would be like, this guy's mad, what's wrong with him? But then in another context, it is simply on his spiritual path. He's simply doing his spiritual practice. So you can see how tricky it is to define something as a psychological disorder. And that's where the cultural and social aspect comes into it. So the way psychologists look at any disorder is at the biopsychosocial level. Now, in yoga, we bring in the spiritual level as well. So we bring in the four dimensions of human existence. Now, just like we have Guru Paramparas, right? Even in yoga, there's Iyengar yoga, or there is the Bihar yoga, or whatever. So there's certain paramparas, and even in the broader context of Hinduism or Hindu culture, we have sampradayas and lineages and all that. So similarly in psychology, you'll have sampradayas, and that's what I like to call these. Basically, there's structuralism, functionalism, or original theoretical frameworks that people proposed to explain mind and behavior, and then they derived certain psychotherapeutic orientations based on that. The psychodynamic is one of the most popular ones, and also the cognitive and psychodynamic. And cognitive and behavioral kind of went together and became CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and then the psychodynamic is its own thing. Then there's psychoanalytical and Jungian, and there's so many different, but these are sort of some of the early sampradayas that originated. I'm not going to go into too much detail of these. You can kind of read up on them, but basically, I just want you to understand the breadth of, even in psychology, even though we just use one word psychology, there's still a huge breadth. And as a field grows, you will notice that its depth and breadth also grows, right? So even though psychology is only, you can say, about 100, 200 years old, it has roots going way back to Aristotle and Plato, but since then it has kind of evolved, and so many people have contributed, and there's so much research and empirical evidence and experience from practice that it's just growing. So, and each of those theoretical orientations or the philosophical orientations are contributed towards developing practice techniques. So, one of the things that these schools of psychology do is you will have someone who proposes a particular theory of the mind. For instance, you will have someone who proposes, like Skinner said, B.F. Skinner, he is a proponent of behaviorism. And behaviorism simply says that it's, you can sort of program a person's mind by altering the behavior. So you approach it from the behavior side. I guess just to give an example, it's mostly applicable to children. So let's say you change a child's daily schedule. You're changing their behavior, and you're hoping by that you're changing their thought patterns, the way they understand the environment and themselves. So it's just a rough example. Any questions so far?
I have
Yeah.
same behavioral response can be said for the practice of yoga asanas, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even
So you
yama,
do the
niyama.
asanas and then it gets reflected back.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Same thing, like we say that when the mind is agitated, your body is agitated inside. But if you go the reverse, if you sit quietly, your mind will be
Absolutely.
right. So
In fact, the cyclic meditation mantra, that's basically what it says, right?
We just finished
You
the
just did
whole
that,
concept of
yeah.
it.
So it's like you alter your behavior and you calm the mind down, and then you keep that steady mind and don't allow it to go down further or get agitated further. Yeah. Okay. And then there's the social cultural aspect.
Savitha, we just did the yoga therapy. We are doing yoga. You are doing the Western psychology. I'm doing the Eastern Western psychology with the Eastern lens, and Eastern psychology with the Western lens. So we are sort of doing that together. I just finished one session where we talked about the behavioral therapy, and we talked about Skinner's the pressing the lever.
Oh, okay.
Very quick, but we'll be.
So that will come under operant conditioning and
we just simply
yeah,
brushed on those ideas.
classical
just a bit.
conditioning. Yeah. Okay. So that will come in the next module. I don't know if I'll be
No,
able
we
to
are
get
not.
to that.
I'm not covering those.
Yeah.
I'm just bringing the Eastern
Right.
psychology, and that we just.
Right. There are a lot of parallels. You can in fact you will start noticing these parallels, and I do that like constantly when I'm sitting in class, and anytime any theory is presented, that's the first thing I notice. And in fact I have written these, in fact I should probably share that with you and with all of you. We were taught all these different theoretical orientations, and what I did was in the last quarter, I did a comparison of that with Hindu psychology and yoga psychology. So each of those, so I've written about 9 of those papers. It's like essays, and unfortunately I was limited to only 2 pages. Otherwise I could have written like about 7 or 8 pages on each of them. So I did that comparison, and I sent it to Swamiji, and he, whenever I say Swamiji, it means Swami Bodhananji. Okay, so there are different disciplines and subdisciplines in psychology, so you can see why this is such a popular subject. In fact, it is in UCLA, it is the highest number of students do psychology as a major in undergrad. It's like, it's really popular. I don't know why UCLA is so popular, but I'm sure it's pretty high number in a lot of the other universities. So it's like it's like economics, for instance. Economics is like one of those very generic subjects that you would do as a basic undergraduate course, and that can then launch you into so many different fields like marketing or MBA or banking or whatever. Right? So you can just take a quick look at this. One of the few of the things I wanted to point out is Depth psychology is related to Jungian philosophy. How many of you have heard of Carl Jung?
Yeah.
Some of you have heard of, I mean, whoever has done the psychology courses, you would have come across Freud and Jung and Skinner and Watson and all these psychologists. And then there's the integral psychology that I wanted to point out, which actually I think was originally pioneered by Sri Aurobindo. And some of his concepts are being, or his approach is being taught at CIIS up in San Francisco. It's the California Integral Institute something. What does it stand for, CI? I can never remember. California Institute of Integral Studies.
Integral studies.
Yeah. And so I wanted to point that out. And then health psychology. Pretty much what we are doing in yoga therapy will come under health psychology. In fact, I know that Vyasa has introduced one whole semester curriculum on health psychology there. That the students, I think the PGDYT or even the master's MA level students are doing that. So this is, health psychology is like an exploding field actually. It's a huge field.
You can say. You can tell, right, why the psychology number. It's an indicative of where the world is going.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, that's my emphasis. My emphasis in Santa Clara University is health psychology. And then the other one is positive psychology, which is again a lot of this self-help and new age and self-growth and growth promoting. Because the emphasis has mostly been on abnormal psychology, which is the number one up there, right? That's where it started. And then people started realizing that, wait a minute, why are we only focusing on abnormalities? What would what is human potential? What would a human who has achieved the highest potential look like? And let's focus on that. And so that's the positive psychology. Okay. Again, let's not spend too much time on this. This is basically just to show you that it goes back to like the 5th century BC. There's even back then there was differences between philosophers. Plato had this approach that it's tendencies, mind and behavior tendencies are inborn. That's how you are born. Aristotle is like, no, you're not born with these tendencies. These are based on nurture. You're conditioned. You can be you can learn it. And then there's like different philosophers, and mostly people philosophized about these things. But for a long time, it was the church that kind of controlled a lot of the, the cultural aspects. Like the culture was dictated by the church in Western countries. And then when Darwin came in with this evolution theory, it just kind of shook everything up. Because it's like, whoa, wait a minute, God didn't create us? It just challenged the whole Genesis and, that whole thing about creation theory. And so there was this big shakeup, and that was kind of, I'm guessing that's the era of reason, rationalism, the Enlightenment, and then since then, a lot of psychologists, the field has grown. Since then, the field has grown tremendously. So basically started in the early 19th century is when people started questioning these things, questioning the church, and then coming up with their own theories. And since then, there's been an explosion. So I'm not going to go through that. You can look at it on your own time. The fundamental questions that they ask is very important. So Swami Vivekananda in his writings also says that, you only gain knowledge if you ask questions. And you only gain knowledge for the questions that you have asked, because that's what you're open to learning. You won't learn, otherwise it's just stuffing. People are just stuffing things into your brain. It's just information. But knowledge is something that only when you seek it, when you ask those questions. So what are the questions, fundamental questions that psychologists ask? What is the knowledge that they are seeking? It's something like this, along this line. So nature versus nurture is like this huge debate that's happening in all circles actually, even in medical, in the psychological area, in neuroscience, is like huge research in that area. Do you guys know what that means, nature versus nurture? I don't have to go into that. Free will versus determinism. Again, you guys are familiar with these terms. right? It's basically free will is like, okay, man has the capacity to just make his own choices. It's all free will. It's like, it's sort of like you can say the karma theory where I do good karmas, good things happen to me. And if bad things happen to me, it's because I did something bad. That's kind of free will. But then determinism is where, oh, too bad, it doesn't matter how many good karmas you do, your fate is already written, it's already there. It's it's already there in some palm leaves in some temple somewhere, and nothing you can do to change it. But then there is this big debate: is it free will? Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? Is it that? And they're not being able to resolve it basically. So, what drives our behavior? That's the question. And then there is judgment and memory, where psychologists always want to know, how accurate is our memory, how good is our judgment really. We think we know, we think we can decide, but really how good is it? And then the conscious versus the unconscious, and this is explored in yoga theory also. The unconscious mind, where like Patanjali talks about samskaras, for instance. Samskaras are embedded in our unconscious, and a lot of times the way we behave, the way we react to situations, our beliefs are driven by these samskaras. And from the Freudian Jungian perspective, it's from the unconscious. And then of course they explore what are the differences and similarities between different social groups and cultural groups and personalities. So those are the fundamental sort of questions that they're asking. And now I see that there is some change in the way they're asking what questions they're asking. Now they are more curious about what is the spiritual dimension all about. They do ask that, and there are new fields of psychology and research that are coming up which try to explore that spiritual dimension. Okay, I'm just going to switch gears here and quickly go through this section because it's kind of part of the whole health psychology study that we're doing. Now, you guys will do this in other sections, right? I mean, things like the neurons, neurotransmitters, nervous system, all of that stuff. But just to emphasize that there is this very strong body-mind connection. And we know that. See, in our perspective, the mind is much more, like we go through the Panchakosha, right? So there's the body, the Annamaya Kosha, and that is the grossest level. Then the Pranamaya, and then the Manomaya, and Vijnanamaya. So from that perspective, it gets subtler and subtler and subtler. And as it gets subtler, it's actually, the subtler it gets, the more pervasive it is, the more, the harder it is to pin it down locally. Like you technically can't locate the mind. There is no such thing as, okay, the mind, why do we say the mind is in the brain?
You get a headache for one if you think too much. So
yeah, but really, is the mind really in the brain? Where is it physically? Is there a physical entity called the mind, and is it located somewhere?
Interestingly, Patanjali says mind is in the heart.
See?
That's why we say I am. Nobody
Yeah.
says I am.
Yeah. Ayo.
I heard that each cell has its own mind.
Yeah.
Each cell of the
Exactly. So then it goes back to what do you mean by the mind? So if you define the mind in one way, then you locate it in that way. You define it in another way, locate somewhere else. Now, the psychologists or sort of the Western philosophers came up with this idea that the brain creates consciousness because of all the neural activity, right?
True, yes. That's how we believe.
That's what you've been taught,
Yeah.
which leads
If you're in
to
a coma, then we can.
which leads to the idea that the mind is in the brain, or the mind is somehow connected to the brain. So that's why we walk around thinking that this is the mind up here, right? But in reality, the mind is a subtler, like from a yoga perspective, the mind is a subtler entity. So if it is subtle, it cannot be located physically, right? So you see the differences. So these are all models, right? Nobody can prove it. You cannot empirically prove that the mind is in the heart or in the brain.
But then to find out free will and determination, they are doing this split brain experiment, right? how this cut the corpus callosum and
Yeah.
see how the decisions are made. So it's still the focus is on the brain.
It is. Because that is the
Or
fundamental,
psychology.
because the question, say again I told you, what knowledge you're seeking depends on what question you're asking and what assumptions you have made. Where did that question come from? So it's the question you ask sets you on a path to the next question, to the next question. So you're going in that direction. Our ancient rishis went in different directions. The questions they asked were different. And the tools of research they had are different also. For
I
them,
would say the questions are the same except the path is different.
the path is different because the
Tools are
different. So they didn't have the tools to cut open the brain and do the kind of research that cognitive science or neuroscience or whatever is doing today. So the neuron, you guys know all about this, right? Well,
Not
Dr. Lata can teach you. Dr. Lata, I don't have to waste time on the
someday
neurons.
they'll know that.
No,
Someday.
Savitha-ji, one thing I want to say is like last time, and I talked to Ashwini about it. Ashwini was talking about the Panchakosha. Then, like you were saying, initially you were drawing parallel, and now you're always drawing parallel. And I'm in the beginning stage. I'm seeing the parallel, and I'm really fascinated how it could be that ancient rishis and all knew this before cutting open the brain and knowing their anatomy. So even the Panchakoshas, if I can just interject,
Sure.
is when I heard her talk about the different states like Annamaya Kosha, I was thinking really if you think about it, the central nervous system is organized like that in the body. Like the basic thing that all animals have is the body functions like movements and all those things. And that would be from the brain it comes, but it goes into the spinal cord and it is there. Then if you think about the brain is sitting here, the brainstem is here, and then the spinal cord. So above the spinal cord is the brainstem, and that's where the breathing, the heart and the breath centers are. Like that's where the pranamaya portion, that breath is. Because if someone cut off my head right here, I can still live. It's just that the upper things are not there, but I have that. And above the brainstem is what is the limbic system, the mind, where we have the emotions and the desire, all the emotions. And then on top of that is the cortical system. That is highly evolved in humans, and then just below us would be the apes. But it's not as developed in other organisms. That's where the discrimination is, the cortex that tells, Ashwini gave an example. You see a pen, but you are like, is it mine? Should I take it, not take it? That discrimination and the cortex is what does that, the Vijnanamaya portion. But I could not, I was thinking, where did the Anandamaya kosha be? But I don't know. Maybe that's what you're saying.
That's beyond the psychology,
the
right?
Yeah.
But just to see the parallel, like how the organism itself is organized like that.
Well, the thing is, that's beautiful. Thank you for bringing that up. Again, like Ashwini and I were talking, the tools of the research are different, right? The tools of gaining knowledge. So our rishis didn't have the tools to cut open the brain and look at the spinal. Although in Ayurveda, I'm sure they have some parallel information on that. But just sitting in meditation, just through empirical observations of society, of how people live and how people think and behave and all that, and through their own intuitive observations in meditation, they just came up with this model. So what we have to understand is these are models that they have proposed. And the models explain, we use the models to then build other things around them, right? Like we built this whole yoga therapy practice around this model of Panchakosha, around this model of the three gunas. And Ayurveda has built its whole system around the three doshas and some other concepts. So we build based on these models. And the efficiency of the system depends on the sophistication of these models. If you build a nice sophisticated model which is consistent with the evidence, the more consistency you have with the evidence, the better that model will function, right? It will not be 100% because you have to remember that it's a model. So we can't get attached to it, but at the same time we use it for what it's worth, if that makes sense.
To explore further.
Exactly.
I was listening to one of the Osho's audio, and what he said that in Eastern philosophy we never did any surgery because every body would be cremating. We didn't have bodies to do any surgery or to see, right? That's why in Eastern medicine never evolved or surgery never evolved. And the way we, like Ayurveda came about is just we used our body as a tool. We just sat, meditated, and that's how we know the nadis. If you go into deep meditations, you can see the entire, right? You can see what, if you eat this apple, how this apple is going to behave in the system. So I think that's
Absolutely.
how Ayurveda evolved. And
Just subtle observations of yourself, subtler and subtler observations of yourself through doing the asanas. In fact, you will also realize yourself that the deeper you go in your asana practice, the more subtle things you'll start noticing. You'll become very sensitive to subtle changes. Like you'll notice even from day to day, oh, this asana, I was able to do it in this way that day, and this today there's a resistance somewhere else, or there is improvement here. You'll start noticing these subtle things. So imagine the level of subtlety that they went to, right? And again, the nadis, I think it's beautiful. Ayurveda is a fantastic, beautiful system, but you also have to put it in context. In the context of where people lived in India with the ecology the way it was, and the culture the way it was, it fit. Everything fit. They were all like puzzle pieces that kind of fit together to form this big picture of that civilization. And here we are trying to take that puzzle piece and fit it into another puzzle. We kind of have to shape it a little bit. So that understanding has to be there. And the same thing with yoga therapy, right? Whatever yoga was, however it existed in the ancient times, we got to take that, shape it to fit to our times now.
Can I interject one?
Sure.
I promise I'll take only 37 seconds.
Starting now.
I really like what you said about the sophistication of the model, so it can explain more things. But very interestingly, so the yoga philosophy according to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it's very simple. There's no sophistication at all. In fact, Yoga Sutras does not have any mention of the Panchakoshas. There are no Panchakoshas mentioned by Patanjali.
Yeah.
And the only thing that is founded on is the Sankhya philosophy, which says that there are only two things in the universe. One is life and the other is inanimate objects. And all inanimate objects, it clubs into one thing, the Prakriti. And the Prakriti can have all complexity. We can say the whole building is composed of nothing but protons and electrons, that's it. So it's very simple, but yet there is profundity in
Absolutely, thank you. It is simple because it's reduced down to its indivisible elements. Purusha and Prakriti are the indivisible elements that Patanjali reduces it down to. However, that's great as a philosophy. How do we live it? Right? So how would you take Patanjali? At what point would you take Patanjali? And again, Atha Yoganushasanam simply implies that you are coming to yoga for a purpose after having satisfied certain things, certain prerequisites. We are still at the prerequisite stage, right? We are not there yet. So then how do we apply that? How do we...
Theory and practical.
Yeah, theory and practical. But like you're saying, if you can reduce it down to basic principles, like Newton's 3 laws of motion, reduce down everything in nature, every physical law, reduced down to those 3. Beautiful, right? Simple. That is what our rishis did for us. But then you have to take those Newton's laws and then create a machine out of it, right? For that you need the complexity. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right, I won't waste time on neurotransmitters, but it is very important. So please study this. Please understand what neurotransmitters are, how they work, how does a neuron work, how does the synaptic connection work. Did any of you guys who did the psychology classes learn this? No? Really?
Why is this important, and how are we going to use it in
You won't directly use it in yoga therapy, but any medication that Dr. Lata prescribes has effect on neurotransmitters. So any medication that your people are taking has an effect on this. And when you look up yoga research, when you go in and start looking up yoga therapy research, a lot of the research, they are doing a lot of research in conjunction with cognitive neuroscience, and they're trying to look at, for example, what effect does yoga have on the GABA neurotransmitter? What does it have on the serotonin, on dopamine?
And the sympathetic parasympathetic system,
yeah.
it's good to know that.
It's good to know that.
At least be familiar with
Yeah.
it.
So when you read these research papers and you read something like dopamine, okay, what is dopamine? It's a neurotransmitter. Why is that important? What does it do? You know, so this is just like some building blocks of knowledge that you need to know.
So don't get freaked out. Don't freak out on these. They are already complaining. There is so much,
Too much
of
information. That's why I'm
We
not
understand.
covering it. I'm
Yeah.
just leaving it.
Just see. You should also develop an art of, sometimes just letting it pass. So don't worry. We are not going to kill you with all these information. Slowly over a period of time, you will start getting used to these things. So for now, just understand. Like remember, we said storytelling. This is a story for now. Okay, there is something called neurotransmitters. There's some chemicals that are going to make you happy or sad. Good enough, right? For now.
Yeah, just to simplify it down to like basic principles, you have hormones. You're all familiar with hormones, right? You have all these glands in the bodies that produce hormones, and the hormones affect your physiological functions, right? You got that. Similarly, in the brain, you have these chemicals called neurotransmitters, which the body produces, and they are more related to how the nerves behave. So the nerves are the ones that transmit the neurotransmitters, between them and to the rest of the body, right? To activate the nervous system, to activate certain responses that are needed. So they're important for that, and they lead back to the functioning of the mind. So it's connected with the mind. The neurotransmitters are connected with, like Ashwini said, it's connected with emotions, it's connected with moods, so it's connected with the mind. And the neurotransmitter whole system is so complex. There may be people know only about 100 of them. They're named maybe 100 of them at the most, but then they interact with each other. And so it's almost impossible to parse out exactly what each neurotransmitter does and where and when and what effect it has. So the understanding at this point is kind of at the gross level. You just kind of grossly understand that there is, for example, dopamine is the reward center, meaning it's a pleasure. So when someone takes a drug, for instance, this becomes very important when you study substance abuse. Someone is on a drug, they get a dopamine rush, and it affects the dopamine rushes to certain parts of the brain, which then translate to a feeling of pleasure, and then they enjoy, like you feel an enjoyment. But then once that dopamine level starts coming down, the pleasure comes down, and then you feel the loss of that, and then you start craving that. So then you go back and you take more of that. So that's kind of grossly how to understand that. That's how dopamine works. Okay, and endorphin is again another. It's a hormone, but it's also a neurotransmitter, right?
Neurotransmitter.
It's a neurotransmitter. Yeah. So it's kind of for pain, and it's also kicks in when you exercise, right? Your endorphin levels go up, and so it helps you. So I have some reading here, and you can just kind of read that. And this is again a table which explains the most common neurotransmitters, like acetylcholine, dopamine, endorphin, GABA, glutamate, serotonin. So you can just kind of read and whatever. See, the way this works is you kind of have to learn in a mosaic fashion. Okay, so the first time I looked at this slide, I was like freaked out, because I looked at it in class and I had an exam coming up. So I'm like, oh, how do I memorize this? But the learning has to happen in a mosaic way. And what I mean by that is, today you're exposed to dopamine. You listen to something about dopamine. Then be curious. Go and, maybe next time you read some article. Oh, there's dopamine. Okay, let me read this. What is that about? You have another piece of the mosaic. you know, a mosaic is built with many tiny pieces. So there's many, many, many tiny pieces of information that then comes together, and then you form the bigger picture. So you get the bigger picture after you put those pieces together. So I just wanted to point out neuroplasticity is again something that cognitive neuroscience is recently, well, maybe too recently, maybe a couple of decades ago, discovered, which we knew for a long time, right? That's what the whole yoga thing is about. Yoga and meditation is really about invoking that neuroplasticity and putting it to work. And there was this feeling that the brain is, once the brain is formed and once a child grows up and becomes an adult, the brain is frozen. You can't change it. So there was that misconception. So now there's this new field that has opened up, and it's like, whoa, wait, even at the age of 80, you can change your brain, literally. So why not? Okay, nervous system, you guys will learn this. Basically, the sympathetic, parasympathetic, somatic, autonomic. So you'll get to learn this more about this. Same thing with body chemicals and behavior, hormones. It's kind of, again, like she said, it's kind of good to know at a kind of a higher level. Now this, I want you guys to really understand. The states of consciousness. Now psychology, the way psychology uses the word consciousness is very different from the way we use it in yoga circles. That is very important for you to know. So when you read an article, any article with reference to modern psychology, and they use the word consciousness, don't mistake that with like Atman or Brahman or you know, don't mistake that. Their idea is simply the subjective awareness of ourselves and our environment. Right? So right now, my consciousness, my field of consciousness includes seeing all of you guys, trying to think what I should say next, listening to my own voice, and kind of mulling in my head, did I say the right things or not? And, you know, what possible questions you guys might have. Those are all the things that are like floating around in my consciousness. And of course, there's a bunch of other things which kind of come in now and then, but majority of my consciousness is occupied by this awareness. And it's my subjective awareness.
Sorry, in yoga there's a word for that in the yoga.
Please.
It's called pratyaya.
Pratyaya, that's it. That's it. So their version of consciousness is simply pratyaya. Okay? Now, they are aware of a higher level of consciousness. They are aware of that because from Eastern studies or from, bless you, from Eastern texts, they are aware of that, but scientifically they haven't quite figured out what that is. So they won't take something into account unless they have a full understanding, a full scientific understanding of it. So, excuse me. Different ways of defining consciousness, the automatic versus the controlled. Automatic, another word for that is simply the unconscious, right? So, do you understand what that means? Can someone explain what that means? And how would you know if someone's behavior is coming from their unconscious or is it a conscious behavior? Take a stab at it. Not Sriramji, someone else.
Sometimes when you're driving.
Not you, not faculty. Come on, from the students.
Yeah, so when your response is immediate, that's coming from unconscious. When I'm like thinking and then doing it, that is coming from conscious. When I took a couple of seconds and then changed. So, for example, if my child would have done one thing in this class, suppose my daughter is here and she did something wrong, at home I will shout at her. But here, that is my unconscious behavior. But here, I'm aware that there are other people, they might be watching me. So I will alter my behavior.
Okay.
So that is in my.
Okay. So what I hear you say is that. Okay. So are you equating unconscious and conscious with reaction and response? Is that the same
No.
thing? Because
No.
what you're saying is that at home you react without processing, and here you take a step back, you think about it, and then you respond.
No, so it's not coming from the place of calm. I'm just not saying that. My response could be different. What I'm saying is unconscious is when it's a reflex, right? Immediate, then you're not even thinking about it. But conscious is when you're thinking. It may be wrong or it may be right. The outcome of that may be anything, but that is I'm being conscious of my surroundings, and I'm being conscious of, what's going on around here, and then responding.
Okay.
It may not be from a place of calm or yoga. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So maybe doing something with greater awareness, doing something more consciously, doing something with greater awareness is
Yeah, what is that? What is that awareness? Aware of what?
greater.
Doing something with an intellect maybe behind it, and if you know that you're doing something wrong or right, and still do it or not do, there's something behind which is watching you and saying, I know this is wrong, but I'm still going to go and do it.
Okay.
Versus
Reasoning.
just doing it because you don't realize it just happens, but there is no thought behind it, in the sense that it could be,
Again,
like you said.
I'm hearing reaction versus response.
Greater
That's what I'm
reasoning,
hearing.
with greater
yeah,
reasoning.
that's what.
Still,
Yeah.
reactivity versus response. Anyone who's taken psych classes, can you differentiate unconscious and conscious?
I don't know, but I can give an example. But silent meditation, we are conscious, right? What we are doing, and we are doing regular meditation. Without your knowledge, the mind goes somewhere. Silent meditation, awareness of the body, right? So what you are doing. So the other meditation, when you are just because your eyes and think about something. So that time, you are without your knowledge, you think.
Okay. Okay. So that is just the mind drifting off. It's just what do you call it? Distraction. I would call that distraction. So, anyone else? Yeah, Srikanti. Go for it.
Is it that controlled or the conscious would be where we're aware of the consequences?
I
Or
was
even aware of
thinking,
the self when we're doing it?
like if I have social anxiety, my automatic thought is everyone is judging me. Whereas that's like an automatic thought coming from some subconscious.
Yeah, yeah. So along those lines. So
A child suckling on the mother as soon as the child is born is automatic behavior,
Mhm.
whereas a
That's
child
instinctual.
instinctual. I thought that's what automatic meant.
No.
No.
So here we are okay. So so this concept of unconscious is actually very I don't know if it is directly addressed.
Vasana
In-
based, right?
Yeah.
It's a vasana
Yeah.
based.
So it is the whatever we call the storehouse of samskaras or vasanas. It is similar to that. It is very similar to that. Okay. So just to give you an example, biases. Like if I have a bias against something, that's in my unconscious. I may be consciously responding very calmly to something with a bias. But the bias is in my unconscious. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
We just covered the vasana and the storehouse of vasana and the unconscious mind. We
Right.
just drew the parallel in the other. I
Right,
sent you
so-
those slides.
So that's kind of what it is, right? And when you are, and why is this important for yoga therapists? When you are with someone who comes, like a participant who comes in for an evaluation, now just because that person looks a certain way or talks a certain way, our unconscious mind jumps to a biased conclusion of what that person's lifestyle may be like, what that person's likes and dislikes may be like, what, how to interact with that person, how we should talk to that person. A lot of that automatic stuff is happening in our unconscious. Okay, so we'll get more into that, but I just wanted to point out that's very important.
So it wasn't. I didn't clearly get.
You didn't
what-
clearly get it, right? Okay. So, Vasana, how does Vasana work? I'll give you an example. I go to a temple and I feel good in the temple. Why? What makes me feel good?
Can we call it sanskara than the vasana?
Yeah, samskara and vasana are typically used interchangeably.
Vasana only used in a negative way. With all the
Yeah,
negative
yeah,
things,
it is used in a negative way,
All
but
the impressions,
Yeah.
what you have brought. To
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
soul.
so I'm trying to explain how, like, there's things that I'm not conscious of, programmed in my mind. So when I go there, there's a smell that comes that I'm unconsciously reacting to that smell, that I like that smell, right? But that is in my unconscious. It's not that the smell per se is good or bad. Nothing in the world is good or bad. We only make it. And where does that come from? That comes from our conditioning, from our unconscious mind. And there is more to it. Like the unconscious mind also operates, like we also employ defense mechanisms when we are interacting with the environment and with our in our relationships. So I'll bring that aspect also. So then I think it'll be more clear. But I just wanted to get an idea of where you guys were in terms of your understanding.
Yeah,
So
like we just said, right? With respect to yoga and psychotherapy, we said unconscious mind can be equated to vasana storehouse. And why we are not able to so easily distinguish is because of our own, we look at everything in a continuum as opposed to, there is a clear mind and body and there is this unconscious versus conscious. We see more as a complete spectrum, right? Remember, we just covered that, where we talked about samskaras, vasanas, and this unconscious mind is basically nothing but vasana storehouse.
So when you talk about biases, what you're trying to say is that when we have somebody coming in, we have to be non-judgmental?
As much as possible, yes.
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 Keeping our biases aside.
But then how do you keep your bias aside if you don't know that you have a bias?
Yeah, you have to be aware of it.
That is what is in your unconscious.
You should be aware of
That,
even though you are aware of it, it's hard.
It's hard because
Yes.
even if you're
yes,
it's
it is
difficult
hard.
to be hard. I mean, because everybody thinks they are right?
Absolutely.
Because through your experiences, you have developed a bias
Yes.
which you don't know about, and
Yes.
you are so righteous about that.
Yes.
That it's hard to
Yes.
get past that.
Yes. Absolutely.
So
So,
nowadays we are labeling everything.
We are constantly judging. right?
Judging, constantly we are judging everything.
why?
Like in general, I'm saying, if we are seeing something, we are like, we are thinking in our mind over and over, we are judging that person, or we are like, we are
Yeah, that- I mean,
overthinking,
that's-
overthinking kind of.
That's human nature, right? That's raga dvesha. That's pretty much like sums up human nature,
Right.
likes and dislikes. And Bhagavad Gita clearly says, I mean, that you have to get beyond this raga dvesha. But the thing is, you still have to, when you interact in the world, there is a difference between judging versus being judgmental. Judging is where you invoke the viveka, your discrimination, because you're like, okay, I don't want to work with that person because that person is flaky and comes late every time. So I'm going to work with this person who is more reliable and punctual. That is viveka. But being judgmental about the person, it's like, oh, that person is bad because he comes late every time and he's unreliable. There's a difference there, right? So viveka versus being non-judgmental. Okay, got that. Okay, so altering consciousness, and there's another set of nice table, nice information that you guys can look at. This is basically just different chemical substances that alter the consciousness in different ways. So there's psychoactive drugs, plus even commonly available things, like caffeine or nicotine, and nowadays marijuana is legal too. So you can see alcohol. Alcohol is like a huge problem. What does alcohol do? What does it do to the neurotransmitters? So if someone comes in to yoga therapy with a smoking problem, like, I want to quit smoking, you can go to this table and look up, okay, how addictive is smoking? Nicotine, basically. And what does it do? What does it do to the brain? Just stuff like that, information like that. And then the severity of and you can also look at this table to get the severity, like does it have only a psychological dependence or a physical dependence? If it's only psychological dependence, then most likely they will improve with just yoga therapy. But if there's a physical dependence, send them to Dr. Lata. She'll prescribe
detox.
Yeah, she'll prescribe a detox program for them. Stuff like that, right? So it's just very general knowledge. Now we come to altering consciousness without drugs. Now again, from the Western psychological perspective, the way to alter consciousness without drugs, I didn't list the most important thing here, which is psychotherapy. But then the psychotherapy, the purpose is not necessarily to alter consciousness, although it kind of happens over time. But the most obvious ones that you'll see are like hypnosis. You'll see all these, magicians doing hypnotic tricks on stage and in Las Vegas and all these performers. But hypnosis was used quite a lot during Freudian times. In fact, I think it was Freud who actually experimented with that initially, and it was quite popular back then. But then scientifically, I think it kind of got dropped because they were not able to study it scientifically. It was the evidence on whether it is really effective, what it actually does, was kind of not clear. Then there's other ways, and one example is like sensory deprivation, which is used. You can read up about that. It's basically just a technique that is used to alter the state of consciousness of the mind for relaxation. But then there is a threshold where if you deprive someone of certain senses beyond a certain threshold, then it actually alters the mind in a negative way. So it actually causes distress.
So, sorry, two things came to mind when you said that. One, fasting could alter consciousness. That is also practice in sadhana. Another thing, when we talk about pratyahara, so basically we are
Yes.
in a short span of time, we are actually shutting off the outside world. Like
Yes.
when we do Shamika Mudra.
Yes.
So is it something similar that we are trying to target, namely alter consciousness by, just
Yes. Except this is done in a more extreme way. It is externally induced. Here, these practices are internally induced. So there is a difference. When we internally induce it, we have blocks and resistance. The brain and the mind blocks it from going beyond a certain point, right? So beyond a certain point, we resist it and we want to come out of it. But when it is externally induced, then you actually can take it further. You can for example, if you shut the light out, you put someone in a dark chamber, then that is externally induced, right? It's not like closing the eyes, because anytime you get that resistance, you just open your eyes and you're out of it. So that's the difference. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And even there are some people who will internally induce that sensory deprivation, but then take it to such an extreme that it may even cause them distress. Like fasting also, like some people will take that to an extreme, but then there is something that they're not doing right. Because if you take it to the point of distress, there's something that they're not doing right. They need to look into that. Does that make sense? Okay, so most important thing that psychologists and psychotherapists look into is basically emotions and motivations. These are the two aspects of the mind that we study. And there's the technical terms that they use. There's the affect that they use as the experience of feeling that emotion. So the word is, the way we pronounce the word is affect. It's not affect. It's affect, and it's a noun. Affect is a verb. So affect is the what experience we get when we feel that emotion. And there's some other technical terms about the valence and I don't know if that's on this slide. Emotion, motivation. Yeah. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that the emotion is a mental and physiological feeling state. So, and there's a corresponding physiological state for every emotion, right? So a feeling of sadness will be accompanied by some change in your physiology. And that is important to recognize. And when we study psychotherapy and when we work with clients, we are constantly looking for what changes in their physiology. Like, do they change breathing rate? Are they sitting up straight, or are they hunching, or what do they report? Or even if they self-report that they're feeling some pain in their stomach or some pain in the back. So we're looking at that. We are constantly looking at that, and it's an important component.
Yeah, just to draw parallels, since we are here drawing parallels, emotions and motivate, especially emotions. If you want to learn the Eastern perspective for that, Bharata's Natya Shastra and Abhinav Gupta's Rasa theory. Phenomenal. They even talk about the Sthayi Bhava, where for every rasa, for every emotion, there is a Sthayi Bhava, which is what are the physiological effects and how the person manifests that rasa on the stage. It works, it says stage, but actually in the life, in the stage of
real
life.
life also.
So can you kind of look at a person, like when you're doing therapy, is it possible to look at a person and say, okay, she has a knee pain, and I don't know if that's the right way, but then can you trace it back to something that's going on in a person's mind, or does that happen? Like she said, manifest. So say a person who's very depressed, does that translate into maybe knee pain or the back pain, and then you can go back and say, oh, probably
that's basically what yoga therapy is all about. That's what you'll be doing the next several modules, is making those connections. What's important in the way we study this in Santa Clara University is they encourage us to make those connections for ourselves first. It's very, very important. So for the way, the reason I like this course that I'm doing is it's extremely experiential, and it is like a sadhana. So they ask you to experience it. They ask you to go and actually work with the therapist, experience all these things. And then when you're working with clients, then you will be able to bring that subtlety of observation. It's not the knowledge, like just because so if I am anxious, my stomach may hurt. But that doesn't mean everybody's stomach will hurt when they're anxious. But it's a subtlety of awareness that I have, that there is this thing that happens when I'm anxious. You bring that subtlety of awareness to your interaction with the client. Now, with whatever I know about yoga therapy is you take an assessment, right? You take the full history of that client. So the better landscape you get of their history, and maybe whatever traumas they have faced in life, what stressors they have right now in their lives, and then as you work with them, you understand their personality, how they deal with stress, and then you understand how they are in the yoga class. How do they react to you in the yoga class? Like there's some people who have very anxious personalities. You tell them to do one small change in the practice and they'll get freaked out, right? So you understand these subtle things as you keep working with the client. And Ashwini and Beena have tremendous experience, and Savitha, tremendous experience in this field. So you can check back with them and see. Then you'll get a better understanding of how do they deal with stress. What happens to them when they are stressed. Where does it go in their physiology, in their bodies? Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a very quick question. I'm surprising to see that the emotions are tied to the sympathetic division, because when we think of, in the bullet point it says, it's created by sympathetic nervous system. Usually when we think of sympathetic nervous system, it's like fight or flight. So that fear I can understand comes from sympathetic, the emotion of fear. But what about positive emotions such as love or devotion? I find it hard to think that sympathetic can create that.
Okay, so Dr. Lata can correct me if I'm wrong. What I feel is that it is related to arousal. And sympathetic does arouse. Joy is also an arousing emotion. Excitement, joy, happiness. So the thing is, it is the label we put to it. we put a negative label to fear and we want to fight it or run away from it. We don't want to run away from joy and happiness or even surprise. Like some people can't deal with surprises, but mostly even if there's something surprising, but if it's exciting, surprise is also exciting, right? So it is an arousal, but we don't put a negative label to it. Does that make sense?
I agree, because again I have to go back to Bharata's Natya Shastra, because he had said 8 rasas, not 9. Navarasa, right? We say only Abhinavagupta brings the 9th rasa, which is the Shanta rasa. So that is not any of these. So that alone can be parasympathetic driven. All the rest of the 8 rasas have sthayi bhava associated with them, which means they all are, he even says latent impression. They are samskaras, they are arise from samskaras. All of that is being very beautifully elaborated. And the 9th one, which was not brought by Bharata but later Abhinavagupta, where he says Shantarasa.
But Shantarasa, isn't that a balanced state?
Yeah, exactly. That's why it was not.
But it's not a parasympathetic state, it's a balanced state.
That's why it was not even qualified as rasa.
As a rasa, okay.
And Abhinavagupta goes out of his way to say, yeah, that also is a rasa. But Bharata doesn't even bring it.
Yeah. Okay. Is that clear?
Yeah.
And you know, the sympathetic system, sympathetic system basically is for survival, procreation, so all that has part of sympathetic. So that's, when you think about joy, it's not only fear, flight, fear or flee, and fight or flight. It is the other things too. For procreation, sympathetic is important. So.
So can we say that sympathetic is the yang and parasympathetic is the
Yeah,
yin?
yin and yang, yeah. Both are there.
So that's kind of how they work.
Or in yoga, Ida Pingala.
Ida Pingala, yeah.
Okay.
Actually, or is it Vyuthana Samskara and Nirodha Samskara?
I think that is in the unconscious mind still.
Samskara.
That is Samskara is in the unconscious mind. Okay. Yeah, I'm learning too. Okay. Why do we care about emotions and why do we want to study affect states? Because it directly relates to our health. And in yoga therapy, we are focusing on health psychology basically, right? It is part of health psychology. So everything that is physiological is also psychological. So you have that two-way street basically. So if someone is suffering a knee pain, the knee pain could have come from something else. It could have come from some heavy object falling on their leg. But chronic knee pain can cause problems for them emotionally and mentally, right? It brings down the emotion. There is a lot of stuff that happens where they are like, now I can't walk, and I can't take care of my job. I can't do my job anymore. I will have to go part time. What if I lose my health insurance? And there's so many things that they'll process in their minds which can alter their emotional states. So we kind of have to be aware of both. It's not only that they have negative emotions and that goes into the body. So these are the fundamental emotions that psychologists work with: anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, surprise. Of course, there's a whole gamut of other emotions that we can bring up, but there is different parts of the brain that experience these different emotions. And like Dr. Lata was saying, there is the primitive part of the brain, which is at the brain stem, right? Fear comes from there. The amygdala is the part of the brain that really registers the fear and sends those signals, those warning signals. And the cortex has to process that. So the cortex is sort of the judgment area of the brain, right? Our viveka comes from the cortex. So we see a snake and immediately the amygdala is like blaring the signals like ah, ah, ah. And the cortex has to say, whoa, wait a minute, that's not a snake, that's a rope. Or that snake is dead, it's not going to bite you. You know what I mean? So you got to have that. But sometimes what happens is that if that amygdala signal is so strong that it silences the cortex, then you kick in the fight and flight response. So psychotherapy, yoga, all these kind of techniques are simply to help us integrate the function of these different parts of the brain. You don't want to silence the amygdala. You want that amygdala to warn you of danger. It's functional, it's survival, it's valuable, but you don't want it to be the master. You want the cortex to be the master, right? You want the prefrontal cortex or the medial cortex, whichever part of the brain that you're then invoking to interpret that signal. So there's different parts of the brain that function differently. And then there's also the memory center, the hippocampus. So the hippocampus registers implicit memory, which also goes into your unconscious. So implicit memory is something which came in another slide, but I'll just talk about it. I forgot to talk about it back then. It's something that is quite powerful, actually. Trauma is something where your senses are in high alert when you are faced with a traumatic situation, and your implicit memory is recording a whole bunch of things and storing it. Unfortunately, these things can trigger you. They are also like samskaras, right? So you have a traumatic accident, let's say, and something was happening during that accident. Maybe there was some, let's take a random thing, that there was a bush of flowers, a particular type of flowers. Your implicit memory records that connection between seeing those flowers and having that traumatic accident. And your unconscious mind has created that connection, that the image of that flower, bad. Something bad happened when you saw that. You don't even realize it. So there's some people who will have like these weird phobias to things. They don't even know that at some point in their lives they had some kind of traumatic incident which connected those two in their implicit memory. Now, of course, the way, there's different techniques to bring that out, right? And in psychotherapy, we have a systematic desensitization that we do. That is the cognitive behavioral approach. And then in psychodynamic, you may do like free association or dream analysis, or there's different ways in which people come to find out the truth of why that particular flower triggers that reaction. But that's the point I'm trying to make, okay? That implicit memory is very, very powerful, and we do record a lot of things there. I'm running over time, so maybe we should wrap up at some point. But
I just want to point out the similarity with the Pavlov dog.
Yes, the conditioning.
The
classical and operant conditioning.
Was at the
yes.
ring of the bell. But here you are saying it happens with one ring. It's not like a repeat.
Yes. So I'm talking about it from the memory perspective, from where it gets stored in your memory, implicit memory. And of course, explicit memory is obvious, like we read something, we remember it. Okay, so should I just stop here, or is there's a lot more to cover? Yeah, I think we should stop here. Okay. Thank you all for your attention and for your questions. It enriches the presentation, but it kind of slows it down.
We'll do the survey.
Survey Bhavan. Okay.
We will be doing a lot of study groups. We'll be covering, discussing, and all these concepts will be covered over and over and over again on Wednesday mornings, on various occasions. So don't worry about that. You don't have to worry about remembering everything here. It's just a 10,000 feet view right now, just throwing jargons, but later it'll all come into place. Please take your snack, the box that I brought. Please do take it along with you, the snack tea, and we'll work with yeah. Tomorrow you can also make the oatmeal. Oatmeal there. You can just we bought it from Costco. There's a lot of oatmeal.
That reason you bring it
Cycling meditation, yeah.
I have to finalize this schedule.
Yeah, I'm here. Agita जी, आप ये ले लीजिए और white वाला वो ले लीजिए, ये सब यहाँ पे जाएगा. ये जो this and all those.
Anybody wants this bag?